Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm going to cover the controversial topic of keeping African cichlids and American cichlids together in the same aquarium. A lot of people will pull their hair out over this or smash their keyboards, if you will. There's a lot of controversy. Some of it I think is very valid. This is just my opinion. And so I have a couple distinctions where I will agree with the sentiment that you should not mix them. And then I have, as you can tell by this 120 gallon community tank, I have some thoughts and beliefs about how you can and why you can, not only safely, but in a way that is very enjoyable to the aquarius, because you have a lot of really interesting, cool fish that are living in a community together. So the ways that I agree with those that think it's blasphemy and that are labeled as purists in the aquarium hobby is two main items. One is imbunas and the other are wild caught. So imbunas to me are the pound for pound most aggressive fish in the hobby. Yes, there are larger fish that are more predatory, especially American cichlids. Of course, there's large river and lake fish, such as the Goliath, the tiger Goliath, or arowana, or arapaima, or you name it, certain gars, right? These are fish that are really quite aggressive and have a real or true predators. Those fish, albeit are larger and can eat mbuna probably quite readily and easily, pound for pound, meaning square inch of size, mbuna are absolutely, in my book, the most aggressive fish in the hobby. And that's because a 3-inch to 6-inch mbuna can do the same destruction to your tank as a wolffish, for example. If you get the wrong mbuna, good luck. And so mbuna are a whole, specialty of fish keeping, in my opinion. The only two mbuna, and I know there's probably a few more because I'm not an mbuna expert by any means, but the two mbuna that I feel comfortable keeping in community tanks are, one of which you can see in this tank is the yellow lab, which is behind this fern currently, and one that I have kept before that I don't currently have, which is a yellowtail acai. And those are typically considered the most peaceful mbuna, and my experience is just that. The yellow lab in here, so you just saw a blood parrot chase it, which a blood parrot is not considered a very aggressive cichlid. So it gives you a sense of, that mbuna, the yellow lab, not only is it strikingly beautiful, but it really works well in the community in the sense that it's really not overly aggressive like most mbuna. So taking mbuna out of it, the other thing that I agree with the purists is wild caught fish. So if you plan to keep wild caught fish, which my estimate, which is totally made up, is that 99% of aquarium hobbyists never will and never intend to buy wild caught fish. Now those that do, obviously you already are a purist because you're buying a really expensive wild caught fish. And the reason I say that I agree with wild caught fish being separate in separate tanks is because they are coming from the wild, and therefore they are used to a particular water parameter. And why that is important, which leads into my first point of why I don't agree with the purists, is that 99% of the fish that are bought are not wild caught, and they are raised in fish farms at very regular parameters, not special parameters for that fish. So this Taiwan reef hap right here, the chances of this fish being raised in water that was almost the exact same to this green terror in a farm in Florida is extremely high. So knowing that, that's one point for why it's totally workable. The second point in terms of water parameters, which I think is even more important, let's say that you had breeders who were really, purists in that sense, and they raised this Taiwan reef hap with a higher pH, and they raised this green terror with a lower pH. And now you're putting him in this tank, which is about 7.6 to 7.8, right, which is pretty medium. You could say that the green terror is going to be happier and the African's going to be less happy. Well, my experience is that what's most important about water parameters is one, that they're within a healthy range. So if I had a really low pH, yes, there's a chance that this African would not be happy. But because my pH is really kind of smack in the middle, you know, that cichlid to me looks absolutely beautiful. And the reason why it's not having its stripes is because it is one of the top fish. When it gets bumped out of the hierarchy, those typical Taiwan reef stripes come back. And I've seen this with Venustus. When a Venustus are the top in the hierarchy, they'll get like a green sheen. There, the firemouth and the Venustus are having a moment. So sometimes, you know, if you didn't know already, cichlids colors change drastically based on hierarchy. And this Taiwan reef is one of the top dogs in this tank. So it is very healthy though, and has done really great in this water. And the main concern I have is not what my pH is at, which it is a concern in the sense, again, I want it somewhere in the middle that's going to make any fish happy. Because none of these are super specialized fish where I need a really high pH or a really low pH or something like that, right? All these fish are really quite hardy, and so I have a really medium pH. So what's most important for water parameters is consistency and stability. So if I tried by adding a bunch of things to this tank all the time to change the pH, and the pH kept changing up and down, that would be extremely stressful to all these fish. It's way better to keep a stable pH than to try to achieve a pH through drastic change. When parameters change, that's one of the main things that stresses out a fish. If pH changes drastically or often, if temperature changes drastically or often, if the nitrate level changes drastically or often, these are things that will cause more stress to fish than, you know, supposedly that this Taiwan reef is supposed to have, you know, 8.0 to 8.4 pH. You know, it's really about stability and consistency because, again, these fish are hardy and they will adapt. They will adapt to whatever pH is what you can keep stable. And luckily, you know, my tap water comes out at 7.6. This driftwood lowers a little bit, but I actually do have some crushed coral that's underneath this rock right here to just balance it out. And so once I found, you know, what will keep a pH, I just maintain that pH. I'm not adding crushed coral a bunch. I'm not adding any chemicals ever to mess with my pH. I'm keeping it consistent. And you can see the proof is in the pudding. I have a green terror, a red terror, I have a pike cichlid, I have a jaguar cichlid, right? I have a firemouth, I have all these peacocks and haps, and they all are doing wonderful. The other argument beyond parameters is diet, which again, Mbuna are the main fish. That's the issue there. Mbuna are often vegetarian. And so I have fed my yellow lab no different than I've fed any of these other fish, and I've had no issue. So maybe this yellow lab is just very hardy. You know, would it be a little bit healthier and happier if I was feeding it primarily vegetarian? Probably. But is it doing just fine with a blend of cichlid pellets? I even, you know, I feed this tank because it is very predator heavy in terms of the South Americans and the haps. I feed krill, I feed bloodworms, I feed mainly carnivorous foods. I also feed hikari sticks and a really nicely blended cichlid pellet. And that yellow lab has done really great. I've had that fish for 4 years, no issues, not once. So the other thing that people will say is compatibility in personality or behavior. And there are a couple, again, so with the Africans, it's the smallest, it's the Mbuna. They're the most dangerous in creating a successful mixed community. In the South American and Central American, it's the largest. The only fish in here that I'm worried about long term is the jaguar cichlid. And the chances of me having to rehome that fish or put it in its own tank are really high. The jaguar in here, which I don't see currently, is maybe 3 inches. And a lot of these fish are 4 to 6, and a couple 7 to 8. So as long as, at some point that jaguar is going to outgrow every single fish in this tank. And there's a really good chance, even before that happens, usually when they start growing their teeth between 4 to 8 inches, that's when you start to have issues with a jaguar. Yes, it can be done. I have seen jaguars in community tanks. This is a 120, so it's really not big enough, especially how I have it scaped right now, to hold a full-grown. I mean, many people would say this is even too small for one full-grown jaguar. So that's the only fish that I'm worried about long-term, and I'm prepared to rehome it. I'm prepared to potentially, get another tank. Of course, what I'll probably end up doing, most likely, because my wife will kill me, is rehome it. But I'll get to enjoy raising it, and I've always wanted a jaguar cichlid, and I knew if I threw one in here that was small enough, it wouldn't cause too much trouble. And as it gets bigger, I have a pretty good trained eye for trouble in a community tank. So so those are my main points. Mbuna are kind of out of the question. Unless it's a yellow lab acai. Wild caught are out of the question, in my opinion. Certainly you could probably get wild caught that will adjust to whatever parameters you have if you keep them really stable. So even that one's not a full take there. And then what you have to avoid with the South Americans are the large species, right? And that's just because of tank size and predation. It's literally just the biology of these fish. A full-grown jaguar would eat all these fish. So obviously that's a concern. But if you're getting, which every other fish in here is, a relatively same size fish with the same size temperament, again, relatively, you're going to do just fine. All these fish are going to get between 6 and 12 inches. And they all are, none of them are considered wildly aggressive, especially in a community tank. So, part of the cichlid world is you live and you learn and you experiment. And yes, there's some ways, these are all peacocks and haps, sure, it would probably be a lot more simpler. And of course, though, even when you do that, there's still problems with aggression. You still can lose fish. A fish can get attacked. This Venusis could go berserk and kill 2 fish. Like, that's just the nature of cichlids. So I don't think it's necessarily safer to keep just South Americans together. Like, you can see this Queen Tara and Jack Dempsey, like they're having a moment together, and here comes this flower horn. It's like that's just the nature of cichlids, is hierarchy, is jockeying for position, territory. So I'll make a separate video about how I do this, not just why I do it, why I think it's okay and safe and perfectly healthy for the fish to do it, but my best tips and tricks about how to successfully do it. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, I am personally concerned about the jaguar. Other than that, like I said, I feel very confident with what I'm doing. I have been keeping fish for over 10 years, and to me this is a lot of fun. And again, no matter what I do, whether it's purely African, purely peacocks, or purely South American, or purely Central American, there's a really high risk you're going to lose a fish here and there, right? These fish are aggressive, they're territorial, they create hierarchy, and they can and often will try to kill each other. And that's why I will share in the next video how I do my best to prevent that, and I'll give you all my tips and tricks. So I appreciate you watching, and like I said, leave a comment, please subscribe, like, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks so much.